What if one of the most famous men in the world walked into a police station and they treated him like a criminal? Shaquille O'Neal sat in a cold, dimly lit interrogation room, staring at the officer standing over him. "You got no proof, no power," one sneered, cracking his knuckles. Shaq just smirked. He knew something they didn't, because right at that moment, millions of people were already watching, and in just a few minutes, their entire world was about to change. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The reflection staring back at him was unrecognizable. Shaquille O'Neal, towering at 7 feet 1 inch, known worldwide as an NBA legend, was no longer visible. Instead, the mirror showed a man in baggy jeans, a faded hoodie, and scuffed sneakers. Just another black man that the wrong kind of cop might profile. That was the whole point. He adjusted the hood over his head, making sure his face wasn't too obvious. If someone really looked, they'd recognize him. But most people? They only saw what they expected to see. And right now, he looked like someone they'd judge on sight. Behind him, his assistant, Marcus, leaned against the desk, arms crossed. "Shaq, man, you really want to do this?" Shaq didn't answer immediately. Instead, he grabbed his phone and replayed the viral video one more time. The footage was shaky, filmed by someone hiding behind a car. In it, two black teenagers stood with their hands up as a group of cops yelled orders, pushed them against a police cruiser, and searched their pockets for no reason. The caption read, "Cops in this town don't need a reason." Shaq's jaw clenched. This wasn't new. This wasn't shocking. But it wasn't going to keep happening without consequences. He slipped a tiny hidden camera into the lining of his hoodie. It was the kind reporters used. Undetectable. Marcus shook his head. "Look, man, I get it, but these cops ain't going to treat you like Shaq in there. They see what they want to see, and if they see trouble..." Shaq grinned, slow and confident. "Then let's see what they do when the whole world's watching." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "You crazy, big man." Shaq fist bumped him and grabbed his fake ID. Not actually fake, just an older one, from when he wasn't as famous. "They won't see it coming." Marcus glanced at the screen again. "You got an exit plan?" Shaq pulled his hood lower and stepped toward the door. "Yeah," he smirked. "Expose them first." With a deep breath, Shaq pushed open the door to the police station, stepping into a world where he wasn't a legend, just another black man walking into the unknown. The moment Shaq stepped inside, the air in the police station shifted. Conversations that had been loud and casual died mid-sentence. Officers at their desk paused, turning their heads. A few squinted at him, their expressions sharp with suspicion. To them, he wasn't Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball icon, the Hall of Famer, or the philanthropist. He was just a big black man in a hoodie, stepping into their territory. Shaq kept his steps slow, his posture relaxed, though he could already feel the weight of their stares pressing down on him. He had been in countless arenas packed with screaming fans, but right now the silence in this room felt heavier than all of them combined. Behind the front desk, Officer Mitchell, a middle-aged woman with tight blonde curls and a permanent scowl, leaned back in her chair and popped her gum loudly. She looked him up and down like he was a problem before he even spoke. Her voice was bored, laced with dismissal. "What do you want?" Shaq rested his hands on the counter, making sure not to move too fast. "I need help with something." Mitchell rolled her eyes and snorted. "You got a warrant out or something?" A few officers nearby chuckled. One nudged his partner. Shaq stayed calm, unreadable, but his jaw tightened. He'd expected this. "Just got a question," he said, keeping his voice steady, low. Mitchell sighed dramatically, as if he was wasting her time. "Mm-hmm," she muttered, typing something lazily on her computer without even looking at him. Shaq could feel it, the slow buildup, the tension in the air thickening. Then two officers suddenly stepped up behind him. A deep, sharp voice cut through the room. "Let's see some ID." Shaq didn't turn around immediately. He let the moment stretch, feeling the energy shift once again. Slowly, he glanced over his shoulder. Officer Reynolds, a bulky man with a military-style buzz cut, stood just inches behind him, hand resting on his belt. Not quite on his holster, but close enough to send a message. Beside him, Officer Davidson, leaner but with a face that radiated arrogance. folded his arms and smirked. Shaq tilted his head slightly, looking them both over. That how you greet everyone who walks in? Reynolds didn't blink. People who look nervous. Yeah. Davidson smirked wider. People who look like you. Mitchell giggled, spinning in her chair. Shaq exhaled slowly, hands still visible, movements calculated. He wasn't about to escalate things, but he sure as hell wasn't backing down either. He reached into his pocket, deliberately slow, pulled out his ID, and held it between two fingers. Reynolds snatched it, barely glancing at the name before his smirk deepened. This real? Shaq arched a brow. You tell me. Reynolds studied the ID again, his confidence starting to flicker. Davidson, still cocky, shook his head. Ain't every day we see someone like you driving around town. What do you do? Shaq kept his face neutral. Couple of things. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. Like what? Shaq shrugged. Depends on the day. Mitchell laughed. Oh, he's one of those. Davidson leaned in a little, lowering his voice. You from around here? Shaq knew exactly what he was asking. Do you belong here? Instead of answering, Shaq held his ground, silent. Reynolds handed the ID back with a slow shake of his head. Yeah, we're gonna have to take a look at that car of yours. Shaq finally cracked a smile, though there was no humor in it. That right? Reynolds grinned. Yeah, just routine. Shaq chuckled under his breath, low and deep. Routine. Davidson motioned toward the door. Go ahead and step outside. Shaq tapped his fingers against the desk, glancing at the clock on the wall. Every second, more people were watching the exchange. Some officers looked uncomfortable. Others just watched with mild amusement. He could feel his hidden camera still running inside his hoodie. Every word, every movement, recorded. Mitchell leaned forward, resting her elbows on the counter. Better just listen, honey. Shaq stretched his neck, cracking it slightly. He could leave. He could walk out. Let them have their power trip. Or he could see how deep this went. With a slow nod, Shaq turned toward the exit, feeling the officers close in behind him. This was exactly what he'd come here to expose, and they had no idea. Shaq noticed it instantly. The subtle shift in posture, the way Officer Reynolds' fingers flexed near his taser. It wasn't drawn, but it was close enough to make a statement. He'd seen this too many times before. Power games, control tactics, and now it was being played on him. Reynolds tilted his head, eyes cold and assessing. What are you hiding under that hoodie? Shaq exhaled through his nose, keeping his expression unreadable. He wasn't about to let them rattle him. Davidson took a step closer, invading his personal space. He was at least a foot shorter than Shaq, but that didn't stop him from puffing out his chest. Yeah, he sneered. What's under there? Shaq remained still. A shirt. Davidson scoffed, shaking his head. Funny, but we both know people like you usually got something else under there. People like you. Shaq's jaw flexed, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he calmly asked, You harass everybody that walks in here? Or is this just my lucky day? Reynolds smirked, nudging Davidson with his elbow. Man's got jokes. Davidson leaned in slightly. You just happen to have priors, too? Shaq turned his head slowly, locking eyes with him. Why don't you check? Davidson chuckled. Oh, we will. Just thought I'd save us all some time. Shaq's fingers curled into fists inside his hoodie pocket, but he didn't move. Not yet. A movement behind the officers caught Shaq's eye. He glanced past them, spotting a wall covered in most wanted mugshots. One after another, black faces. He shifted his stance ever so slightly, just enough for the hidden camera inside his hoodie to capture the evidence. Davidson suddenly clapped a hand on Shaq's shoulder, his grip just a little too firm. Let's take him to the back, he said with a smirk. Shaq didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He just smiled. Because what they didn't know? The whole world was about to see exactly what they were doing. The metal door slammed shut, sending a sharp echo through the dimly lit interrogation room. Shaq sat in the cold metal chair, his broad frame barely fitting between the narrow armrests. Davidson and Reynolds loomed over him, their uniforms crisp, their expressions smug. They thought they had him. They had no idea. Davidson leaned in first, placing his hands on the table. Let's cut the crap. What were you really doing here? Shaq tilted his head unimpressed. Man, I was just looking for a friend. Reynolds let out a sharp laugh. Right, just looking for a friend. In a police station? Shaq shrugged. Yeah, maybe he got caught up in something. Thought I'd check. Davidson crossed his arms. You expect us to believe that? Shaq met his gaze without blinking. Yeah. Reynolds sighed dramatically, pacing behind him. See, here's the thing. We don't take too kindly to people walking in here, wasting our time, lying to police. Shaq smirked. Lying? Now y'all just making stuff up. Davidson slammed his palm against the table, making the metal shake. Enough! You think this is a game? Shaq leaned forward slightly. His size alone made the officers tense. Nah, man. I think you're just mad because I'm not scared. Reynolds let out a slow whistle. You got some nerve, I'll give you that. Davidson pulled up a chair and sat across from him, arms still crossed. You know, lying to police? That's an offense. Shaq raised an eyebrow. And what exactly did I lie about? Davidson smirked. Well, you said you were just here for a friend, but I'm guessing that's not the real reason. Shaq chuckled. So now guessing is police work? Y'all must be real busy solving crimes. Davidson's smirk disappeared. Reynolds stepped up, placing a firm hand on Shaq's shoulder. You got a real attitude problem. Shaq slowly looked at the hand, then at Reynolds. You should probably move that. Reynolds hesitated. Davidson gritted his teeth. You think you're some kind of tough guy, huh? Shaq exhaled. Nah, man. I just think you're trying too hard. The officers exchanged glances. Shaq wasn't folding. Davidson cracked his knuckles. I think you need to learn a little respect. Shaq's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Reynolds stepped back, reaching for his baton. The room went still. Shaq stayed calm, watching everything. Davidson's voice was low, deliberate, a warning. Might have to teach you some respect. Shaq let a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. Man, he said, his voice even. Y'all really about to make the biggest mistake of your careers. Davidson cracked his knuckles, the sharp sound echoing in the dimly lit interrogation room. He smirked as he rolled his shoulders, looking down at Shaq. You got no cameras here, no one to cry to. Shaq tilted his chin slightly, his expression unreadable. You sure about that? Davidson's smirk faltered for just a second. Meanwhile, the hidden camera inside Shaq's hoodie kept rolling. They think they have the power. Reynolds leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Davidson with a smirk. Man, this dude really thinks he's got options, Davidson scoffed. Nah, he's just stalling, probably trying to think of a way to get out of this. Shaq remained still, his hands resting on the table. Get out of what exactly? Davidson took a slow step forward. See, when someone like you walks in here, acting all cocky, it makes me wonder. Makes me think you're hiding something. Shaq shook his head, almost laughing. He knew their playbook. Reynolds grabbed a chair and turned it around, sitting on it backward. You keep saying you just came in to find a friend, but people like you don't just walk into a police station. Shaq raised an eyebrow. People like me? Davidson smirked. Yeah, people who think they don't have to answer questions. People who think they're above the rules. Shaq let out a deep sigh, leaning back in his chair. Y'all really don't know who you're messing with. The camera is live. Davidson gritted his teeth. He wanted control of the conversation, but Shaq wasn't giving him an inch. You think this is funny? Davidson leaned in, lowering his voice. You think someone's going to save you? Shaq tilted his head slightly, his fingers casually tapping against the table. What Davidson didn't realize was that those taps weren't random. A vibration against Shaq's leg confirmed it. Live stream started. Thousands of viewers flooded in almost instantly. The screen lit up with comments. Wait, is that Shaq? Why is he in a police station? Yo, this about to go down. Davidson pulled out a notepad. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell us exactly why you walked in here, and if we don't like your answer, maybe we hold you overnight. Maybe we find something on you. Shaq let the words hang in the air before he chuckled. Man, y'all really think you're untouchable, huh? Davidson smirked. In this room? Yeah, I do. The officers are exposed. Shaq took a deep breath and leaned forward, his towering presence suddenly impossible to ignore. All right, Shaq said smoothly. Let me break something down for you. Davidson and Reynolds exchanged glances, waiting. You see, the thing about power, Shaq continued, it ain't about who's got the badge. It's about who's got the audience. Davidson's smirk twitched. What the hell does that mean? Shaq nodded at the corner of the room. That camera over there? Probably been off for hours. Davidson crossed his arms. So? Shaq smirked. Mine's not. Davidson blinked. What? Shaq stretched his arms out casually. See, while y'all been running your mouths, thousands of people been watching. Reynolds straightened up. What the hell are you talking about? Shaq lifted his phone slightly under the table, just enough for them to see the screen. 50,000 live viewers. Davidson's face drained of color. You? Reynolds lunged for the phone, but Shaq pulled it back effortlessly. Too late for that. The comments exploded. Oh snap, they done for. These cops are about to get cooked. Bro, the way they looking around them. Oh, Davidson stammered. That's illegal. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Oh, so now y'all care about what's legal? They have no escape. Reynolds clenched his fists. Turn it off. Shaq shook his head. Nope. Davidson grabbed the back of his chair. You? Shaq leaned in, his voice a low, controlled thunder. Y'all just got caught. The door slammed open. A sergeant stormed in. What the hell is going on in here? Davidson swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the sergeant. Shaq just smiled, lifting his phone. Go ahead, Sarge. Say hi to the whole world. Davidson leaned in, his smirk dripping with arrogance. What, you think you're special or something? His voice was low, almost taunting, as if he had already won. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. He had let them play their little game long enough. Y'all really don't recognize me. For the first time since this whole thing started, nobody spoke. The officers glanced at one another, their confidence flickering. Mitchell, the receptionist, was the first to react. She narrowed her eyes, tilting her head as if trying to place him. Davidson, however, scoffed. Oh, I see. You're one of those guys who think they're a big deal in their own heads. Shaq grinned. He reached up slowly, grabbed the edge of his hoodie and pulled it back. As soon as his full face was visible, a sudden shift in energy swept through the room. Mitchell gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Wait, you're... Reynolds took a half step back, his face draining of color. Davidson? Still clueless. He let out a sarcastic chuckle. Oh, what? You some YouTuber or something? Shaq tilted his head, amused. Man, y'all serious. Reynolds' mouth opened and closed, his brain scrambling to process what was happening. That's Shaquille O'Neal, Mitchell finally breathed. Like, the Shaquille O'Neal. Davidson froze mid-laugh. Wait, what? Shaq leaned forward, resting his massive arms on the table, towering over them even while sitting down. Yeah, he said smoothly. And y'all just messed up. Davidson blinked rapidly, his face a mix of confusion and denial. No, that's... But Reynolds was already backing up. Oh, man, this is bad. Davidson spun toward him. Why? Who the hell is Shaquille O'Neal? Mitchell snapped her head toward him. Are you kidding me? He's one of the most famous athletes on the planet. Hall of Famer, business mogul. He's literally Shaq. Reynolds ran a hand down his face. And we just harassed him on a live stream. Davidson whipped his head back toward Shaq, eyes now wide. Wait, live stream? Shaq smirked, lifting his phone. The viewer count had skyrocketed past 200,000. The internet watches it all. Oh, they screwed up. They don't even know who they're messing with. Shaq about to own this whole damn police station. Davidson staggered back. His entire world was collapsing in real time. This isn't real, he muttered. Shaq tapped his screen, zooming in on Davidson's face. It's real, all right. Davidson held up his hands. Look, man, it was just protocol. We didn't mean anything by it. Reynolds nodded rapidly. Yeah, we We were just doing our jobs. Shaq's smile vanished. His voice dropped to a dangerous calm. Oh, so your job is harassing innocent people? Profiling them? Using intimidation? Davidson swallowed hard. No, I mean, look, we didn't know who you were. Shaq arched a brow. Oh, so if I was just some random dude, this would have been okay? Mitchell winced. Reynolds glanced at the live stream, then at Davidson. Dude, stop talking. But Davidson was unraveling. I mean, Shaq sat back, crossing his arms. I got a question. Davidson stayed frozen. Shaq pointed toward the wall where the most wanted mugshots hung. Why they all look like me? Silence. Then out of nowhere, the station phone rang. Mitchell jumped and scrambled to answer. Police Department, how can I? Her eyes widened. Sir, yes, he's right here. She looked at Shaq, then at Davidson, and her face drained of color. It's the police chief. Reynolds' jaw dropped. Davidson's legs wobbled. Shaq? He just smiled. Go ahead, put him on speaker. Mitchell nervously pressed the speaker button. A booming voice came through the phone, laced with fury. What the hell did you just do? The sharp ringing of the station's phone cut through the suffocating silence like a blade. Mitchell, the receptionist, flinched. The color drained from her face as she stared at the caller ID. Chief Ramirez. The tension in the room thickened. Davidson and Reynolds locked eyes, suddenly looking far less confident than they had moments ago. Mitchell hesitated, glancing nervously at Shaq, who was still leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, completely unfazed. She swallowed hard and picked up the phone. Police Department. This is Officer Mitchell speaking. The deep, booming voice on the other end made her jump. Put me on speaker, now! Davidson's face twitched, his confidence from earlier melting away. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Mitchell fumbled with the phone's buttons before placing it down on the desk. The call was now on speaker for the entire station to hear. Sir, Mitchell stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. We have a situation. The chief's voice exploded through the room. What the hell did you just do? Shaq didn't move. He didn't need to. Instead, he watched as the officers who had been so arrogant minutes ago suddenly looked like deer caught in headlights. Davidson's jaw tightened, but his hands were shaking. Sir, he started, but the chief cut him off. I just got a call from the mayor. Do you have any idea what you've done? Reynolds, now sweating, tried to speak. Chief, we thought. I don't pay you to think, Reynolds, the chief barked. I pay you to follow the damn law. Davidson's lips parted, but nothing came out. Let me get this straight, the chief continued, his voice dripping with fury. You harassed an innocent man, detained him without cause, and now I'm looking at a live stream with 500,000 viewers, watching your incompetence? Davidson's face twisted, his pride and fear warring inside him. It's not like that, sir, he finally muttered. We didn't know who he was. Shaq tilted his head, finally speaking. Oh, so it's only wrong because of who I am. The chief went dead silent. Davidson had just dug his own grave. The chief exhaled sharply. Davidson? Reynolds. Yes, sir, they both said in unison, standing stiffly. You're both suspended immediately pending an internal review. Davidson's eyes bulged. What? Sir, this is... Don't finish that sentence, the chief barked. Not unless you want it to be a permanent termination. Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in her chair, staring down at the desk. Other officers, who had been watching silently, now looked away, suddenly busy with their computers, not wanting to get involved. Shaq leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. You know, Chief, suspending them is nice, but it ain't enough. The chief sighed heavily, then spoke with gritted teeth. Shaq, stay there. I'm on my way. 1 million views and climbing. The comments on the live stream were flooding in, furious, relentless. This is sickening. These cops need to be fired immediately. Shaq is exposing the truth. Shaq leaned back in the station chair, arms crossed, watching chaos unfold around him. Phones were ringing off the hook. Officers scrambled, some pretending to be busy, others whispering nervously amongst themselves. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Davidson and Reynolds, just minutes ago acting like they owned the station, stood frozen, their faces pale, realizing their careers were dangling by a thread. Officer Mitchell, the receptionist, kept refreshing her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the comments. "Sir," she whispered, looking up at her superior, "we have a problem." Outside, the station was no longer quiet. A crowd had gathered, not just a handful of people, dozens. Within minutes, news crews arrived, cameras rolling. Breaking news: NBA legend Shaquille O'Neal live streams alleged racial profiling at local police station. The headline was everywhere. Shaq checked his phone. Every major network was talking about it. CNN, MSNBC, even ESPN had picked up the story. A loud chant started from the growing crowd outside. "No justice, no peace." Their voices grew louder, angrier. More people arrived, some with signs, others holding up their phones, recording. The officers inside the station exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted toward the exits, like they wanted to disappear. Shaq sighed, shaking his head. "This ain't just about me," he muttered to himself. Reynolds, from sweating, turned to Davidson. "Dude, we need to fix this." Davidson clenched his jaw. "How?" "This is a damn disaster." Shaq smirked. "You should have thought about that before you messed with the wrong one." Davidson's eyes flashed with panic. "Look, man, we didn't know it was you." Shaq's expression darkened. "Oh, so if I was just some regular dude, this would have been okay." Davidson had no answer. The mayor steps in. Suddenly, a young officer rushed in, panting. "Sir," he blurted out to the station chief, "the mayor just called." The entire room went silent. The chief's face turned to stone. "What did he say?" The officer swallowed hard. "He wants to see you. Now." Slam! The mayor's fist hit the desk so hard that the papers on it trembled. His face was flushed red, veins visible on his forehead. "This is a disaster," he bellowed, pacing his office. "Do you have any idea how bad this looks for the city?" Across from him, Chief Ramirez sat stiffly, his jaw clenched. The police chief had faced tough situations before, but nothing like this. Davidson and Reynolds sat beside him, silent. Their arrogance from earlier was gone. And then there was Shaq, calm, collected, sitting in the largest chair. In the room, his hands folded in his lap, watching the chaos unfold. Shaq leaned forward slightly. "You know," he said, voice deep and steady, "y'all didn't care when this was happening to regular people." The mayor sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "This isn't about that." Shaq's eyebrows lifted. "It ain't." Ramirez shot the mayor a look. "Sir, with all due respect, this has been happening, and we both know it." Davidson flinched. Reynolds stared at the floor. The mayor exhaled sharply. "Fine, then let's talk solutions." The mayor turned toward the two officers, his face cold. "Davidson, Reynolds." They looked up, eyes filled with dread. "You're both suspended. Effective immediately." Davidson's mouth fell open. "But, sir—" "No buts," the mayor snapped. "The whole country just watched you profile and harass a man who did nothing wrong. And worse, it was Shaquille O'Neal." Davidson gritted his teeth. "If he wasn't famous, nobody would care." Shaq chuckled. "And that's exactly why y'all got a problem." The mayor straightened his tie, ignoring Davidson's glare. "We're launching a full internal investigation. Every officer involved will be questioned. Every complaint against this department will be reviewed." Chief Ramirez nodded. "And I'll make sure of it." Shaq studied him carefully. He had to admit, the chief actually seemed serious. The mayor inhaled deeply, then turned to Shaq. "I want you on the city's police reform board." A hush fell over the room. Davidson looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. Shaq didn't react at first. He simply stared at the mayor, as if reading him. Then slowly he leaned back in his chair. A smirk played on Shaq's lips. "I got a better idea." The room was packed. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters jostled for position, holding microphones toward the stage. The low murmur of voices filled the air, tension thick as everyone waited. At the center of it all stood Shaquille O'Neal. Dressed in a sharp navy suit, his broad shoulders towered over the podium. He gripped the edges firmly, scanning the crowd. His usual playful smile was gone, replaced by a calm, unshakable seriousness. Everyone knew what had happened. The whole world had seen the footage, but now they wanted to hear it from him. Shaq leaned forward. The room fell silent. "I ain't here to talk about me," Shaq said, voice deep, steady. "I ain't even here to talk about what happened the other night." The reporters shifted forward in their seats, hanging on to his every word. "I'm here to talk about what's been happening for years." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Shaq's eyes scanned the room. "How many times do we got to see the same thing? How many videos? How many mistakes? How many internal investigations before we call it what it is?" The camera zoomed in. A systemic problem. A few gasps, a few nods. Shaq let his words sink in. He turned, gesturing to a screen behind him. The viral video began playing. The moment Officer Davidson and Officer Reynolds stopped him, harassed him, led him into the station. The clip played all the way to the part where he pulled off his hoodie and revealed his identity. Then, freeze frame. Shaq turned back to the crowd. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked. "The second they realized I was famous, their whole attitude changed. The tension in the room was palpable. This wasn't just about me," Shaq continued. "This was about every person who gets treated this way, but don't got a camera, don't got millions of followers, don't got the chief's number in their phone." His voice deepened. "We all saw it happen in real time." He took a deep breath, then delivered the news. "Davidson and Reynolds, they're gone." The reporters erupted in questions, but Shaq raised a hand. "They didn't just lose their jobs, their entire record is being investigated." He glanced at the chief, who nodded from the front row. "And this ain't stopping here." Shaq shifted his stance. "The department is introducing a mandatory racial bias training program. Not a one-time thing, a real one. Every officer will go through it. Every single year, more cameras flashed, more whispers spread through the crowd." Shaq exhaled, then leaned in. "But here's what y'all really need to understand." The room stilled. "Power don't come from a badge. It don't come from a gun, a uniform, or a title." He looked straight at the camera. "Power comes from respect." Silence. "You want to wear that badge? Then earn it. Don't expect people to trust you just because you wear blue. Make them trust you." He let that sit for a moment. Then with one last look around the room, he finished. "And if you can't do that, then take the badge off." The conference ended, but the movement was just beginning.